Temptation. Jesus' temptation, as found early in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, is an extremely important moment in the life of Christ that is all too often ignored. There's a tendency to trivialize the temptation of Christ, as if the temptation was merely a show and had no actual reality. The concern would seem to be that if Jesus was really tempted, which carries with it the possibility of committing sin, it would imply that Jesus is less than God. This is a problematic interpretation, because it presupposes what can and cannot have taken place based not on what God has actually done and revealed to us, but on what we assume God can or cannot do. We are presented with an actual assertion that Jesus was indeed tempted. We must deal with it in one way or another. The key texts that help us to understand the temptation of Christ as having a fundamental soteriological, that is, having to do with salvation, importance are found in the book of Hebrews. In this book, we read statements like 2:17 and 18. He had to be made like his brethren in all things, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the things pertaining to God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For since he himself was tempted in that which he was suffered, he is able to come to the aid of those who are tempted. We also read 4:15. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin. Hebrews interprets Christ's temptation as being the overcoming of our sin from within our broken humanity. This is what sets the temptation of Christ apart from the temptation that other human beings endure. When most people are tempted, they give in to the temptation. When Jesus is tempted, he endures by applying the very power of God to the temptation from within our humanity. In the person of Jesus Christ, temptation has been overcome and defeated. This is not a promise that ordinary human beings can do what Jesus did, as if Jesus were merely an example and nothing more. What it tells us is that we can also conquer sin and temptation inasmuch as we are united to the victory over sin and temptation of Christ. Something we learn from the Gospels about the nature of temptation and the triumph of grace over sin is found in the Garden of Gethsemane. In one account, Luke 22:39-44, we read that while Jesus was preparing to go to the cross, he was being tempted to abandon his mission, which included his death. We read, being in agony, he was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down upon the ground. We learn from this that Jesus experiences temptation in a more intense way than we often do, precisely because we often give in to the temptation before it comes to its full strength. It also shows us that temptation has incredible power that would crush us if we were not united to the victory of Christ through the power of the Holy Spirit. It shows us that any attempt to resist temptation while somehow bypassing the life, death, and resurrection of Christ and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit is futile at best.